Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of our Pambansang Utang webinar. This afternoon, we'll hear about foreign loans of the country and the stages entailed in the borrowing process. Please use the hashtag Pambansang Utang for your social media posts. We'll start in a few minutes. So for the meantime, allow me to take this opportunity to thank our partners for this webinar. This event is co-presented by the Heinrich Bell Foundation in partnership with the Polytechnic University of the Philippines Economic Society, UP Los Baños Economic Society, Universidad de Manila Economic Society, Tarlac State University Economic Society, the UP Visayas Capital Market Investors Guild, University of Santo Tomas Artlets Economic Society, University of the East Economic Society, the UP Visayas Junior Executive Society, the UP Junior Executive Society. Thank you also to the Western Visayas State University, University Students Alliance, the University of San Carlos Carolinian Economic Society, the Economic Society of UP Baguio, PUP Masters of Science in Economic Society, UPLB Agribusiness Society, and the Miriam College Junior Marketing Association. We would also like to thank our media partners, the UPLB College of Economics and Management Student Council, Excelsior PH, the Oikonomos Nexus, Idea Magazine, UP Mindanao Society of Agribusiness Economists, Yabang Pinoy, and Youth Action Development PH. We'll start at exactly 4:05 p.m. Thank you. Good afternoon once again to those joining us in the Zoom room and to those virtually connected via Facebook Live. Welcome to the second installment of Econcepta's webinar series on foreign loans, the Pambansang Utang, breaking down the billions borrowed on your behalf. My name is Tisha Evite and I'll be your host for this afternoon. So for those who are new to our page, kami po ang Econcepto. We write infographic primers and conduct webinars such as this para po mapalapit sa publiko ang disiplina ng economics. So kung kasama namin kayo last Thursday, we learned about the economics of debt from Mr. JC Punong Bayan of UP School of Economics. So yung recording po, you can access it on our Facebook page. So aside from that, we also learned the use of fiscal policy o yung paggastos ng gobyerno as a means to help our economy to recover. So ito yung ginagawa pag yung interest rate sagad na, no? It's already at its lowest. Ito yung tinatawag nating monetary policy na manage ng Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So as some of our participants may recall, it was also mentioned that there are different sources sa tinatawag nating pambansang utang, no? So meron tayong domestic debt, meaning umuutang tayo sa mga kapwa Pilipino natin sa pamamagitan ng pag-issue ng securities or bonds. Tapos meron namang foreign versions nito. So mula sa ibang bansa, tinatawag namin itong bilateral, or mula sa international financing institutions, kagaya ng World Bank at Asian Development Bank. So gaya ng napanggit ni Sir JC noon, actually mas malaki yung porsyento ng domestic debt kaysa sa foreign debt. Pero dahil isa ito sa pinakamainit na usapin sa media, dito tayo mag-zoom in today. So here to help us learn more about this topic is Attorney Miguel de Maculangan of the Department of Finance. So Mr. Miguel works as an attaché at the International Finance Group of the DOF. Miguel has been practicing as a lawyer in the banking industry and has taken various roles such as the trust legal of Security Bank Corporation from 2015 to 2019. He also is the head of trust operations in Philippine Savings Bank of the Metro Bank Group in 2019. He also worked with the tax department of SGB & Co. He graduated from law from the Ateneo de Manila University, where he also took up his undergraduate degree in management engineering and international business. Miguel is also currently pursuing his master's in business administration at the Asian Institute of Management. So without further ado, everyone please join me in welcoming Attorney Miguel.
Hello, good afternoon, mga kabataan. So technically hindi na yata ako nabibilang sa kabataan sa youth sector. But I was once part of the youth. And this afternoon, I will be discussing a talk about development cooperation and understanding ODA and debt financing. So if we can proceed with the next slide, please. So for this afternoon, we will be discussing the talk in 3 parts. So for the first part, I will be tackling the definition of development cooperation. And for the second part, the legal basis and approvals for foreign borrowing. And for the third part, it will be ODAs and the difference between ODA, Official Development Assistance, and PPPs, or Public-Private Partnerships. Next slide, please. So what is development cooperation? So this is aligned to the UN Sustainable Goals. Specifically, we have this goal called partnership for the goals, no? Wherein there should be a strengthened and revitalized global partnership for sustainable development. So this has 4 criteria. First, development cooperation aims to explicitly support national or international development priorities. Second, it's not driven by profit. Third, it discriminates in favor of developing countries. And fourth, it's based on cooperative relationship that enhances the developing countries' ownership. So what does this mean? So kapag umuutang po tayo ang isang bansa, dapat po naiisip natin yung development cooperation. Hindi lang po tayo basta umuutang sa ibang bansa, pero may pinanggagalingan po siyang policy, which is to assist developing countries like the Philippines. And now we have the goal of being part of a middle-income country. So napakahalaga po nito sa ating ekonomiya. So next slide po. So there are different types of development cooperation, no? So it can be in the form of a financial cooperation, or it can be capacity support. So pag sinabi po natin financial and in-kind transfer, dalawa lang po yung major categories nito. Although pwede po siyang makategorize into different modalities or types pa, pero ang 2 major types po ay yung grant at yung loan. So ano ba yung grant? Ano ba yung loan? Pag sinabing loan, we all know that utang siya. There's a creditor and debtor relationship, di ba? But the difference between a grant and a loan is the transfer, okay? When it comes to the repayment, no? in loans, there's a repayment of the principal plus a portion of the interest, a portion called interest. For grants, it's just zero repayment, no? So that's the major difference between a grant and a loan. So later on, it will be discussed on thoroughly. So for other financial and in-kind transfers, we have PPPs, climate finance and investment, and in-kind. So it can be an in-kind transfer or an in-kind donation. No? For capacity support, ito po yung tinatawag nating technical assistance. So this is not technically pecuniary in nature. Hindi po siya pera per se, but it can be in the form of technology cooperation, transfer of technology, transfer of know-how po, and sharing of policy experience. Ayun. Listening from Iligan City. Hello. Wow, ang lagi ng narating. So, next slide po. So, bakit po tayo umuutang? So, ano po yung reasons kung bakit po tayo umuutang? So, ito po yung top 3 reasons. First po, investment. So, as we all know, we have the Build, Build, Build program po. So, when we say build, 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 there's an infrastructure investment involved. And the ultimate goal is for economic development. We all want those infrastructure projects to redound to the benefit of Filipinos. No? We want a more comfortable life in the future. So there's a cost-benefit analysis that should be taken into. No? We have the cost for the investment. At the same time, what are the benefits that should be reaped in the long run? So that's the first type po. So when we say investments, normally it pertains to the different projects. So magpo-fall siya under a category we call project financing. So the second type, it's budgetary requirements, meeting budgetary requirements. So budget support po. So unlike a project financing modality, specific po yung project financing to a certain project. Say, train, the subway, for example, or a bridge, or a road project. So yung financing po, yung kontrata, in the proceeds from the loan will only pertain to that specific project. But when we pertain or when we talk about a budget support financing, it pertains to a program that can encompass any resource that is, or any item that is eligible under the General Appropriations Act po. Ito po yung budget ng Pilipinas. So it's some sort of a fiscal support to the budget of the Philippines. So normally po, ito yung mga program loans or pwede rin po yung capital markets, issuance of bonds po na, for example, mag-i-issue ng bonds sa Philippines, yung mga ROPs, din po yung mga types na magfo-fall under budget support. No? The third will be an economic stabilization during crisis. No? So this is also one of the reasons. So what can you see dun sa left side? So dun sa left side, bird po siya, tama? Pero to be more specific, it's a swan, no? It's a swan. And what's the color of the icon? It's black. So it's a black swan. So in finance and economics, we have what we call a black swan event. As we all know, a swan is white, no? But it's possible, or it's really existing here, na there's such a thing as a black swan. So in economics or finance, a black swan event is something that is unexpected. At the onset, we don't know that there exists such an event, pero it can happen. So it can surprise us in the future, no? So what's a type of a black swan event? So it can be World War I, for example. No one expected that World War I will happen. Another type of a black swan event is the 9/11 attacks or a pandemic such as COVID. So ito po yung mga crisis na hindi po natin inaasahan. So in such cases, we need to top borrowings just to have a budget support, no? So that it can help us have more fiscal space for our expenditures in the future. So this black swan event or this concept was coined by an economist, or I think he's more of a Wall Street guy. His name is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. So he actually has a book about the 2008 financial crisis. So it's something interesting, the Black Swan. So next slide, please. Okay. So at the onset, kanina, pinag-usapan po natin yung development cooperation. Pero we all know that financing or lending is something that's commercial in nature. So how do we tie them all together? On the one hand, we have development needs. On the other hand, there's a commercial transaction involved. So with this, we talk about risk management. So finance or any type of financial transaction is always risky, no? So every financial transaction involves an exchange of money today with an expectation of future return. So in the case of loans po, there's a creditor and a debtor relationship. So yung debtor po, yung mangungutang, has a cost, di ba? Mag-suspend siya ng cost pertaining to the repayment of the principal plus interest, no? On the part naman po of the lender, yung nagpapautang, meron siyang expectation to earn. So yun po yung economics behind loan financing, no? So the cost is in the form of an interest payment, and you use interest for the forbearance of money, no? So if I am an investor, for example, balik tayo sa lending side, and gusto ko po mag-invest in sovereign bonds, for example. Yung sovereign bonds po, it's a type of bonds wherein the government issues money or a loan, for example, for budget support, no? And it's for the public. Lahat po pwede mag-participate through the capital markets. So in this case po, we have an example here, US government bonds and Indons for a 5-year government bond po. So into August 2020, the interest rate of US government bonds was around 0.35%, while Indons po is around 5.65%. So as an investor po, makikita ko na mas malaki at the onset yung interest rate. So mas malaki yung kikitain ko at the onset sa Indons kasi 5.65 compared to 0.35%. Pero since we're talking about risk management, may kapalit po yan na risk kapag mas malaki yung potential na makukuha ko. So the spread, yung 540 basis points po, the difference between the interest rate ng US government bonds and the Indonesian bonds reflects the risk sa akin po as an investor. Okay? So ano po yung mga different types of risk? In this case po, dun sa 500 sa spread po ng sovereign risk, it's called the credit risk. It's something that is pertaining to the capability of the borrower to repay, and alongside with it is sovereign risk. It's the capability or the possibility rather of a sovereign nation or a government to default. So we also have different types of risks. So in this case po, we are using the analogy on a loan or debt financing. Kasi meron din po tayong tinatawag na equity financing na mas risky. Yun po yung mga stocks. So sa debt financing po, less risky siya compared to stocks, pero hindi po natin maalis sa category nito yung risk pa rin po, especially on the credit risk and the default risk. So when we talk about sovereign risks, meron din po tayong tinatawag na geopolitical risks, no? For example po, an example will be yung elections na nangyari sa United States. So depending on whether or not who wins, nanalo po si Biden, nanalo po si Trump, meron po yung repercussions sa financing po. Also, we have liquidity risk. What's a liquidity risk? It's the capability to finance debt servicing expenses in the future. So ito po yung pagbayad ng interest kung meron pong sufficient cash to pay in the future. We have market risk. Market risk po ako, for example, I'm an investor of sovereign bonds. There's a possibility po na yung binili kong Indon in the future, bumaba yung valuation. So meron po akong possible na lugi kapag binenta ko po. Pero in the meantime po, habang hindi ko pa siya nililiquidate, hindi ko pa siya binebenta, yung hinahawakan ko po na what do you call this? The investment in the form of sovereign bonds, paper lang siya, paper gain or paper loss pa lang siya until such time na binenta ko siya. So yun po yung tinatawag nating market risk. Foreign exchange risk po, it will be relevant when we talk about cross-border transactions, different foreign currencies. We have dollar to peso, we have peso to euro, we have peso to yen, for example. So yung fluctuation po ng foreign currency is also part of the risk. And finally, we have systemic risk. What is a systemic risk? It's a risk for an economic collapse, or in case of corporations po, it's the risk na mag-shut down yung corporation. So what's an example po nito? For example, nagka-market crash, tapos malaking exposure ng isang company or isang bangko. So ibig sabihin na natapos na po yung ano niya, yung capability niya to sustain its existence as a corporation kasi malulugi siya because of the market crash. So that's systemic risk. So ano po yung sinasabi ng slide na to? So kapag nangungutang po tayo or kapag nagpapautang, there's always a risk involved. And it really depends on the level of risk that both the investor and the lender and the borrower and the lender are willing to take. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about foreign loans, so it's provided under the Constitution. Ano po yung sinasabi ng Philippine Constitution po natin? Article 7, Section 20. So under the 1987 Constitution, the President may contract or guarantee foreign loans on behalf of the Republic of the Philippines with the prior concurrence of the Monetary Board and subject to such limitations as may be provided by law. So ano po yung key takeaways ng provision na to? First, sa pangungutang po, it's the President who has the power to do it. So normally po, for example, in the Department of Finance, we secure prior approval from the Office of the President before we can contract loans with various foreign governments. So that's one. Second, we need the prior concurrence of the Monetary Board to ensure na the level of external debt is manageable. So there's a control involved po. Hindi po basta-basta na mangungutang tayo without the BSP intervening and assessing whether or not kaya pa. And third, it's subject to such limitations provided under our laws. So what are these laws? We have the Foreign Borrowings Act and we have the ODA law. So yung Foreign Borrowings Act po, yung Republic Act 4860, 1960s pa po yan. So it was amended by Presidential Decree 1939. So basically, ang sinasabi po doon, meron po tayong limitation. So inaalaw po ang pangungutang to different bilateral and multilateral institutions, provided po na meron tayong general rule na 10 billion US dollar ceiling. However, the exception to this rule is ODAs po. So under ODA law, kapag po yung utang forms part of the ODA or it's categorized as an ODA, magiging exempt po siya doon sa ceiling na yon. So we will discuss in the subsequent slides po kung ano po itong ODA at kung bakit po ganon yung dynamics ng ODA sa foreign borrowings. Next slide po. So just to highlight the point na marami po talagang proseso na dinadaanan bago po matapos ang isang loan. So in this case po, the primary consideration is that whatever we borrow should form part of the development. It should have a development aspect. No? So we get some sort of sign-off from the NEDA. So meron po yung mga different departments yung NEDA. It can be the ICC or the NEDA board or it can be the DBCC to check if align po yung development needs tapos may mga cost-benefit analysis pa po yan. So also, there's a project proposal, evaluation of technical merits. So on the implementation stage po, it's the implementing agency doing the vetting po. And then the evaluation of the financing aspects, pumapasok po ang Department of Finance when it comes to the negotiation of the loan agreements. And we have other approvals. And as mentioned po, nandito po yung Bangko Sentral, yung Office of the President po, because again, the power to borrow foreign loans is with the executive. Also, we have the Department of Foreign Affairs, since we are talking about our relationship with different countries, no? Both bilateral and multilateral. And development, we have the DBM, Department of Budget Management, to check if the project has a budget cover. And I will discuss this later on. Next slide. Okay, so in the case of project loans, this is a more drilled down approach po do sa mga approvals. So normally there's an endorsement from the Secretary of Finance, and then we get approval or a special authority from the Office of the President. And then, as mentioned a while ago, we go to the NEDA. So the NEDA will check, depending on the ICC or the Monetary Board, on whether or not it's really economically beneficial to the country. And then, as far as the Department of Budget Management is concerned, meron po tayong FOA na hinihingi. Ano po yung FOA? It's the Forward Obligational Authority. Ito pong FOA is a certification po na there are sufficient funds that the government can shell out for the entire project cost of a certain project. For example, it's the subway or a bridge. So next slide. So what's an official development assistance? So ODAs, or official development assistance, is something that's coined by the OECD. No? It's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So it's a form of government aid designed to promote the economic development and welfare of developing countries, consistent to what I've mentioned during the first slide, development cooperation. This is the entire theme. So with that being said, there are different types of loans which do not fall under the ODA. An example of which, for example, loans and credits for military purposes are excluded. So under the Philippine law naman, we have what we call as mentioned, the ODA Act. And this ODA Act aligns to this OECD mandate. So in the next few slides, I will be discussing the components of an ODA loan in relation to our ODA law. But before that, we will discuss concessionality. Next slide. So, medyo technical na po tayo. So, when we say concessional financing po, contrary to sa previous slide po na sinabi natin na financing is something commercial in nature, no? That's the general rule. Meron po tayong expectation, for example, as a lender or as an investor to earn interest. When we say concessional financing, it is more aligned to the development needs of the borrower. So these are loans that are extended on terms substantially more generous than market loans. So hindi po siya commercial level yung terms niya, kundi more generous po than market loans. So the concessionality is achieved either, so ito po yung mga types, kung paano natin ma-check kung concessional po yung isang loan, no? The interest rates are below market rates. So that's one. Second, yung grace period will be longer. What's a grace period po? So when we borrow, for example, so there's a commitment date, no? So from the commitment date is, there's a certain period of time from that date to the date of the first interest amortization or amortization payment. So yun po yung tinatawag nating grace period. So although nag-obligate na po, at, for example ngayon, the date now is November 8, no? But there's a grace period of November, December, January, February, March. For example, 4 months po. It's only during March na you pay your first amortization. So when we say that the loan is concessional because of the grace period, you can actually stretch the time period wherein you can pay your first amortization po. So that is why it's very concessional, or that is why it is beneficial on the part of the borrower. Kasi meron siyang enough space to spend now for different priorities pa, other than paying interest. So that's one. Second, long tenors. So long tenors is, as economists, you all know the time value of money, no? So when you stretch the interest and the principal repayments for a long period of time, bumababa po yung the present value, assuming a discount factor, for example, or a discount rate of 10%, the present value goes down. Diba? So that is why a long tenor or a long maturity date is concessional. So there you go. Concessional loans typically have long grace periods and tenors. And with this, before po tayo pumasok on the technicalities of an ODA law, we have a video from the OECD para mas ma-appreciate niyo po yung discuss ko kanina, just to visualize kung ano po yung sinasabi ko na concessional, yung long tenors and yung grace periods po.
What is the grant element of a loan? The grant element represents a concession or grant portion of a loan. It measures what the provider gives away by lending at a lower interest rate than a benchmark rate. The benchmark rate is a proxy for the rate the lender could have expected to charge for its loan under market conditions. Thus, the calculation of the grant element compares the repayments the provider will get by lending at a certain interest rate with the repayments he could have expected to receive by lending at a benchmark rate. This comparison is done by calculating the present value of future repayments using the benchmark rate as a discount rate. The grant element determines the level of concessionality of a loan and depends on the financial terms of the transaction, such as the interest rate, the maturity, and the grace period of the loan, and also the discount rate used to convert the future repayments to present value. Let's see an example. Imagine a 100 million loan from a provider to a recipient with a maturity of 20 years, annual equal principal repayments, and an interest rate of 1%. The discount rate for this example is set at 10%. To compare the repayments with the face value of the loan, repayments are converted to present value year by year as shown in the chart using the discount rate of 10%. The calculation of the grant element compares the repayments the provider will get by lending at a certain interest rate, in this case 1%, with the repayments he could have expected to receive by lending at 10%. The chart shows that the present value of future repayments of principal and interest, the orange and yellow bars, is 48 million, thus less than the initial disbursement of 100 million. This means that the lender, by providing the loan at a lower interest rate, gives away 52 million, represented by the green bar in the chart. These 52 million, or 52% of the initial loan disbursement, represent the grant element of the loan. The grant element is thus the difference between the face value of the loan, or loan disbursement, and the present value of repayments of capital and interest expressed as a percentage of the face value of the loan. The discount rate is a key parameter in the calculation of the grant element, as the higher the discount rate, the lower the present value of future repayments, and the higher the grant element, all other things equal. If we redid the calculations for the example using a discount rate of 5%, we can see that the grant element is lower, amounting to 30% of the initial disbursement. Check out our grant element calculator to simulate the grant element of different loans. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. I hope you understood it better with the video. So basically, the concessionality of a loan is measured through the grant element. No? For example, in the case of, ayun, nagsalita na naman siya. In the case of ODAs. So the difference between the present value of your repayments as to the value of the loan now is considered as a gift, which is beneficial to the country. So that's why ODAs are beneficial rather than just a mere expense to the government. So we have the ODA Act of 1996. So it's under RA 8182. So it sets out the different criteria on what will categorize a loan as an ODA. First, an ODA must promote welfare. So the purpose of the loan is to promote sustainable social and economic development and welfare in the Philippines. So that's one. Again, it should always have an aspect of sustainable social and economic development. Second, the loan should be from a government or a multilateral institution. So in this case, there should be in case of government-to-government transactions, kailangan po yung G2G framework, government-to-government framework, will be established. Or a multilateral institutions po. Pwede po yung ADB, World Bank, or other multilateral institutions. No comparable financial institutions, meaning we're talking about the cost or the interest rate. So the ODA Act sets a ceiling of 7%. So hindi po pwedeng umakyat doon ang interest rate. And to be more concessional, before we take out any loan or before we finish or conclude negotiations, we make it sure that comparable po yung interest rates, na mababa po siya. And number 4, the grant element po, as what was discussed a while ago through the video, should be at least 25%. And when we weight it, the average of all the ODAs, so it should be at least 40%. Next slide. So this is the structure, typical structure for foreign financing. So it can be with a multilateral institution, with the IMF, ADB, or World Bank, or it can be with a state or a foreign country. So let's take the case of Philippines and Japan. So for example, the Philippines will borrow from Japan. So normally the Japanese government will appoint a state-owned or mandated financial institution, such as JBIC or JICA. So the counterparty in the loan agreement will be JICA or JBIC in the Philippines. And also, integral will be the implementing agency who will implement the project. So that's a typical framework or a flowchart of foreign financing in the Philippines. Next slide. So this is another animal called a public-private partnership. So what's a PPP and how is it different from lending? Utang po ba tong PPP na to? So ang definition po ng PPP nasa baba. So contractual agreement between the government and the private firm targeted towards financing, designing, implementing, and operating infrastructure facilities and services that were traditionally provided by the public sector. So it embodies optimal risk allocation between the parties, minimizing cost while realizing project developmental objectives. So the project is to be structured in such a way that the private sector gets a reasonable rate of return on its investment. So based on the definition po, masasabi natin na it's not a loan. There is no debt as far as the government is concerned when we talk about PPP. So that's one of the difference, one of the differentiating factor between a PPP and a loan. So the government does not incur debt, so it's considered as off-book financing. Okay. So the second difference is that the parties involved. In PPP, normally you have a domestic corporation involved, or it can be a foreign corporation, but subject to the different regulations and laws, no? So we have the mga restrictions involved, no? Also, what do you call this? As compared to a bilateral or multilateral loan, for example, the counterparty in that loan is a foreign government or the multilateral institution. So that's the second difference. So based on these differences, masasabi ba natin na beneficial ang PPPs or mas okay po ang PPPs compared to ODAs? There's no hard answer for this, but one differentiating example will be in ODAs, it's always concessional, as I've mentioned a while ago. So yung cost po to the government will always be ensured na it's minimized. No? Unlike in a PPP, it's more commercial in nature. No? So that's one difference. Second po, although the government does not incur cost in PPPs, there's a cost that shifts to the public. So in case po of a utility, for example, since commercial nga po itong PPP, pwede po ma-shift yung cost to the public in the form of the fees po na binabayaran natin sa mga bills. So that's also another difference po. So there's a user pay in a PPP. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a spectrum. We will not discuss this thoroughly. Sinasabi lang po sa slide na to, on the rightmost, it's when the private sector, so it's full privatization. The private sector owns and operates the assets. And on the left side, leftmost side po, it's the public naman. The government owns and operates the assets. So in the middle are the different modalities for PPPs. So under Philippine law, as you can see in the next slide, okay. So there are different modalities for PPPs provided under our BOT law. So it can be build, operate, transfer, build and transfer, build, own, operate, build, lease and transfer, build, transfer and operate, contract, add. So basahin nyo lang po, medyo marami yan. We will not discuss this thoroughly. So what's important is that the list of priority projects shall be consistent. Even if it's a PPP, it should be consistent with the Philippine Development Plan in case of projects under the ambit of our national agencies or GOCCs. Or when we talk about the local government, it should be aligned to the Provincial Development and Physical Framework Plan. Okay. So in summary, there are different modalities. So for development cooperation, so specifically, it can be in the form of foreign loans and grants. Also, projects funded by foreign institutions are subject to Philippine laws and regulations. So as you can see a while ago, as you've seen in the previous slides, marami po talaga dinadaanan yan. And marami pong mga limitations under the law. So I think that's the last slide, no? So thank you. So I think the next portion will be on the Q&As.
Okay, thank you so much, Attorney Miguel, sa pag-shed ng light sa mga lagi naming nababasa sa news na loan agreements for the past months now, no? So certainly, it has cleared up some misconceptions tungkol sa process ng foreign financing. Lalo na yung related sa bago pala tayo mag-sign, di ba? Marami palang approvals. So, I remember our team encountered a social media tweet na actually yun po yung nag-inspire sa structure ng event na to. So, it read, lagi daw ba na-approve yung loans automatically from multilateral institutions dahil nakikita nila tayo as a source of payment. So, we see na mutual talaga to kasi it's based on a development agenda. So, yun nga, we see from the presentation na hindi siya automatic, may series of approvals, and bago pa natin kausapin yung source of funding. So, it's also interesting to note yung criteria ng ODA. Yung concessionality, mas friendly pala siya sa market loans, and yung fact na aligned siya sa PDP, ambition natin, and larger goals like the SDGs. So, now we will be continuing our discussion po, no, on foreign loans. We'll have a Q&A, and we'd like to thank our audience for being so pabibo, no? Ang daming nag-send ng questions sa aming Padlet link that we sent out. So, we'll be reading out the most voted queries. So, starting with, ayan, this is about debt repayment. So naririnig natin yung mga sinasabi sa social media na pati apo ko hindi pa pinapanganak, magbabayad na ng loan. So the question is, Attorney Miguel, how long will the Philippines pay its debt? Yung kasama na yung build project financing and yung 2020 pandemic crisis foreign debt. Yan po.
Medyo malawak yung question kasi each loan agreement has its own maturity date. So nasa website naman po ng DOF, you can check kung ano po yung mga maturity dates. Pero based on the principle behind it, as what I've discussed a while ago, on the concessionality of loans po, mas beneficial to the government if it's long dated. It's because of the time value of money po, no? And the discount factor involved. It's the grant element that we're really looking into. So with that, we want to relieve the government at present and the public as well of the burden to pay these interest payments, no? And we want to spread it thinly through time. So I think that's a crisp answer for that question.
Okay, thank you po for that. I think aligned din to sa discussion natin in the last Thursday, no? So, ayun. Next question is yung concerns po on our political relations with China.
Okay.
So, ayan. The question is China's debt trap possible if we fail to repay our debt?
Debt trap. Okay. So, to answer that question, explain ko muna yung concept ng debt trap, no? So, this debt trap, one example will be what happened in Sri Lanka, no? In 2008, 2009, if I'm not mistaken, Sri Lanka just ended a civil war. So there was a new leadership under Rajapaksa, no? So during that time, the Sri Lankan government wanted to recover economically. So one of the projects as part of that recovery was the Colombo port. So they borrowed money from China, and then what happened was that through time, the Sri Lankan government was not able to pay. So na-default siya. So na-debt trap. Kasi what happened was that in the Sri Lankan law, yung leasehold was allowed as collateral to the lender. So how do we differentiate that to the current scenario po? So one differentiating factor will be the economics, no, the levels, the debt to GDP levels that we have now, which is managed in the Philippines. So as far as credit ratings are concerned, we are at the BBB plus rating. So that's investor grade. Maganda po ang ating kondisyon as far as yung pangungutang is concerned as compared to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, I guess, was B minus, if I'm not mistaken. So also, that's one. Second, it's in Sri Lanka, there was an explicit stipulation wherein, for example, leasehold for the port, for example, was allowed to be used as collateral. So in our Chinese laws po, wala naman pong ganon. There's no direct stipulation na we will collateralize our assets, the Chinese government. And third, the exposure of Chinese debt in the Philippines is minimal. So as far as the Philippines is concerned, the number one bilateral partner is Japan. So also comparing to other countries, not just Sri Lanka, for example, we have African countries. So we have Angola, Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken. Their credit ratings are really low. Some of them are CCC minus. So we are, again, I keep on saying, we are at the BBB plus space. So maganda po yung ating what do you call this condition as far as lending is borrowing is concerned. So those are just the differences between those countries which fell into the debt trap as compared to the Philippines.
Okay, thank you so much, Attorney. So yan, at least na-address na siya yung concerns ng ating sentiment ng public, no? So it's also aligned with yung sinasabi natin, yung last Thursday, there was this part of the discussion na since pare-pareho naman ng standing yung countries ngayon sa pandemic, lenders are confident that we'll be able to repay kasi yung GDP growth natin prior to the pandemic ay naglalaro sa 6 to 7%. So, it's something to remember din. No? So, our next question po is about integrity on the uses of these loans. So, yan. Ang tanong from our e-concepto viewer is, may posibilidad po ba na ma-void ang utang ng ibang bansa kung mapapatunayan na nagamit ito sa corruption? Kung oo, paano po ang proseso para dito?
Hindi po to parang Jollibee or McDo na ma'am sir pa-void. Hindi po ganun. May proseso po ang ano. For example, in this case, yung question was about corruption. No? So meron tayong mga anti-corruption clauses. Normally, prevalent to pag multilateral partners such as ADB and World Bank. So ano yung mga safeguards rather under the contract? So one is failure to procure. Meron po tayong cancellation or misprocurement wherein nagiging ineligible po yung contractor sakaling mapatunayan na may corruption na nangyari. So that's one. Second po, meron tayo, I think in Japanese and Korean loans, meron tayong refund na tinatawag or clawback na pag napatunayan po na yung use po ng loan ay hindi po naaayon dun sa purpose. For example, in this case, ginamit po sa corruption, then ibabalik po, i-refund to the lender yung portion. Another safeguard, I think in World Bank or ADB, there's this suspension of withdrawal. So once na nakita na may ganun pong kaso, isususpend muna. Bawal po isususpend ng lender yung pag-withdraw from the amount loaned, from the disbursements. So until it's proven po or until it's resolved. So those are the safeguards that we have.
Okay, thank you. So pareho po sa side ng lender and borrower, may safeguards po on this. Okay.
Yes.
So, thank you. Next po is, so napansin po ng ilang nating viewers siguro sa balita na din na yung pag-employ po ng foreign workers para sa mga proyekto na to. So the question is, kasama daw po ba sa negotiation yung pagbibigay ng preference na i-employ yung mga inutangan like Chinese construction workers, consultants mula sa US, UK, or iba pang bansa?
Okay. So, meron po tayong tinatawag na tied aid loans. Kapag tied aid po yung loan, yung preference po natin for contractors, for example, will be on the lender kasi sila po yung may technical expertise and technology, for example. So with that being said, when we're talking about managerial, technological expertise or those functions which are highly technical, preference will be given to our foreign counterparts. However, when we talk about naman those which are not technical naman, for example, manpower, those which have low value functions, preference will still be given to our Filipino workers. Ayun po.
Okay, thank you. So depende po siya sa nature nung project. Parang yung pag-capacity support and napatunayan yung expertise from the counterpart. Okay. Doon po
Yes,
siya.
it's allowed. It's allowed kasi it's, for example, when we talk about consultancy, so procurement of consultants, that can be waived. No? Also, it's beneficial to the country because there's transfer of knowledge, there's transfer of technology. So in the subsequent phases, yung pong kaalaman ng Japan, for example, or ng, for example, European countries, mapapasa po sa mga Pilipino. So makabubuti po to sa atin.
Okay, thank you so much. So for the sake of time po, we're down to our last question. Ito naman ay regarding sa different sources of financing. So the question is, ano po yung difference between having debt through foreign investors, buying government bonds, at loans from multilateral partners like IMF and the World Bank.
Mm. Okay. So when we talk about sovereign bonds po, yung pagbili po ng sovereign bonds will be with the capital market. So it's more of investing. So yun po yung major difference. Unlike in a bilateral loan, there's really a specific project involved, no? So that's one. Second, when we talk about the purpose of the loan, if it's a sovereign bond, the purpose of the sovereign bond is for budget support. So it's not allocated for a specific project, unlike in bilateral or multilateral project loans, project financing. So also, another type will be on the market risk, no? So more on the investor side po kapag tinatawag na sovereign bonds. Kasi capital markets to, the purpose really is to sell it in the market, sell and resell. So may market risk po ito sa mga investors. Kasi hindi lang naman po sa primary issuance yan eh. May secondary issuance. So pwede po mag-participate yung publiko. Unlike in a bilateral loan po na yung pangungutang po is with a foreign government, not with the public. So yun po yung major difference ng capital markets or ng sovereign loans or sovereign bonds rather as compared to a loan.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think
sorry.
that's a wrap, Attorney Miguel.
Yung governing law pa pala. The governing law, normally kapag bilateral loans, it's normally an ODA loan, so ODA Act. So sa isa naman po, we have the Foreign Borrowings Act. And then, as far as approvals are concerned, kapag sovereign bonds are concerned, it's the DCC normally approving it. If it's an ODA loan with a bilateral partner, it's the NEDA ICC or the NEDA board as applicable. Depende po sa thresholds. Ayun. Thank you.
Okay. NEDA Investment Coordination Committee, sir, ICC.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you po. So, thank you po again for taking the time to discuss with us yung legal aspects naman. So, very complimentary talaga to sa discussion natin last Thursday. So, Attorney Miguel, do you have any final words or message na you want to impart our viewers across the 3 Philippine islands? Yeah.
Sa mga kabataan, huwag po kayong mag-alala. Nandito po kami para i-assure sa inyo na nasa mabuting kalagayan kayo. Ayun po. Have a blessed Sunday.
Okay, have a blessed Sunday, everyone. So once again, thank you to all our participants and Facebook Live viewers for joining us tonight. So, this afternoon, sorry. So we wish to remind that yung certificate po, it will be issued upon the completion of feedback forms. So the links are flashed on the screen. And for our Zoom viewers, you will be automatically redirected to the form. So, plug na lang din namin, if you have a knack for design, we are opening volunteer slots for our storytelling team. So, please join us in writing more infographics for the public. And stay tuned in our Facebook page for a recap of this webinar. And if you want to join our Facebook group as well to connect with other economics enthusiasts, we'll be launching an online book club po and other activities na mas engaging like an online debate. So, ayan. This has been Tisha Evite, your host, on behalf of Econcepto. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.